Hi, my name is Joseph, and welcome to 3-2 of Digimon Seekers, or Chapter 3, Part 2, Unit 11, Digital Missing in Action. Before I continue really quickly, I want to issue a quick explanation about the last video. In my excitement, my QuickTime player was blocking the 3-1, hence why I didn't realize that the last video was indeed Part 1 of Chapter 3. That's why I thought it was an interlude or a prologue of some sort, so excuse me about that. Last video was indeed 3-1, and this is now 3-2. So part 2 of chapter 3. Let's begin with the first quote. This is Yolene speaking with her team. Code crackers contain, Yolene announced in the DigiPolice chat. Well done, squad leader. You're as sharp as ever, came in your instant reply. Spare me the flattery. And alert processing, said Suski. On it. Deputy Squad Leader Satsuki Tamaheim replied in classic carefree fashion, hitting the code crackers with one more attack from Anumimon as she contacted the appropriate officers. What I enjoy about this quote is just in relation to characterization. Right off the bat, superficially, when one first reads this, it sounds like, well, is Yolene going to have a positive relationship with Hatsumi? Hatsumi is obviously very positive and carefree, as stated right here. I wouldn't say she's trying to gain her extra favor. I'm trying to avoid using the term kissing butt, essentially. I don't like to use that term specifically, but I don't think she's trying to do that. Why don't I think that? Because even after Hatsumi becomes not reprimanded, but kind of put in her place a little bit, spare me the flattery and alert processing. Essentially, Yolene is saying, let's just focus on the job. We'll have our chit chat later, if we'll have any chit chat. Instead of becoming upset by her response, her being Yolene, instead of Hatsumi becoming upset by Yolene's response, Yolene just takes it in stride. On it, Deputy Squad Leader Suzuki replied in classic carefree fashion. This tells me, the reader, that Hatsumi is just naturally just happy and carefree. She isn't like that because she's trying to gain her favor, but that's just the kind of individual that she is. I think we've seen that already when she was first introduced in Chapter 1. She's definitely an individual with a lot of energy, and I'm happy to see that the story is maintaining that little tidbit. What I also like about this quote is the fact that just that comment, spare me the flattery and alert processing, said Suski. Again, superficially, one could view this as a cold comment coming from Yolene. She's talking down amongst her underling when her underling's just trying to be friendly, right? But I think in this instance, Yolene is just, again, letting the team know that they're there to do what they need to do. I keep saying again, excuse me about that. Last week, I discussed how the demeanor between Doromon and Ryudomon, and Logomon all seem to be quite different. So far, Doromon seems to be very, he will speak his mind, but politely, in a respectful fashion, while it's Logomon who speaks his mind, not caring how it's going to make the other individual feel. He's quite blunt, and so I would argue that Ryodomon's probably going to be a mix between those two, probably very respectful, only speaking his mind when asked upon. I would argue that we're seeing this being reflected with the human partners as well. Each is the very carefree, go-lucky individual. We haven't met the sons of Chaos Leader Tartarus and Fudito quite yet, but we did get some interaction with him. We'll get a little bit more in this chapter as well. But I argue that Tartarus is a lot aligned with Doromon as well, and it's probably going to be true for Yolene too. Really looking forward to the proper conversation between Yolene and Ryudomon. Anywho, let me make sure that's everything I want to discuss. Anyways, the well done, squad leader. You're as sharp as ever. One could use that as evidence that Hatsutsuki Tamiheim. I don't know why I said Hatsumi. Oh, I'm thinking about the reception. Excuse me about that. Satsuki, that she is trying to brown nose, essentially, gain her favor. But again, I think it's part of her personality. She's just kind of the individual to give compliments. If, for example, they were having a boxing sparring match, and if Satsuki lost, she'll probably say, that was a great upper jab that you did there, Joseph. Can't wait to fight you again, right? I just think it's part of her demeanor. Moving on. This one's a bit of a long quote. What did we catch? Hasuromon. I'm probably not pronouncing that. Excuse me. That's the ultimate form for Ryudomon. Yolene asked, highlighting herself as Hasuromon alighted near one of the restrained Digimon. Familiar foes. Cyborg type cyborg type Digimon engineered for data collection, came the reply. A type line analysis of the seized Digimon gleaned from Saruman's scan. A top line analysis of the seized Digimon gleaned from Saruman's scans. So it seems they were after state secrets, judging by the backup functions and other tools. I would venture that they were sent by familiar overseas adversary, as Saruman continued, extrapolating from their initial analysis. Yoling trusted Saruman's analysis more than that of any so-called expert in the field. A cat and mouse game. It appears there are still a few in operation. What say you? Shall we send one or two back, perhaps with a little souvenir in hand? If your hunch as to who's behind this attack is correct, this is above our pay grade. The Japanese police meddling in international issues best left to diplomats and international courts was a recipe for disaster. Even if they were wrong, current law forbade preemptive strikes on other nations' servers. Yes, indeed. But why not? It's not like we have. It's not likely to have any bearing on what happens to them once they return to the home countries. Yoling was in a rather playful mood. Why shouldn't she engage in a bit of petty revenge? As you wish, Saruman said cheerily, and set to work on the restrained Digimon. Yoling drifted back into her own memories as the sight of the interface on Saruman's forehead. She once knew someone who had a Digimon with the same tech attached to their forehead. Where are you now, Kusuke? What are you up to with that Digimon of yours? So, at this instance, we now have Tartarus's first name, Kusuke. I'm probably not pronouncing that correctly as well. Please pardon me. Thank you for your patience. So this quote, we do get of a little bit of that interaction between the Digimon and their human partner, and I think there's enough textual evidence to suggest that Ryorimon's going to be the type of individual or the type of Digimon he has his own ideas, but he's going to ask permission to speak his mind first. Not because he's submersive, but because he's respectful. Again, very different compared to Logomon, who I would argue will probably say something like, we should send them back with a souvenir, AG. Let's get some revenge on these tools who are trying to get state information or secret information. And Duromon, I would believe would say something along the same lines, but just more professionally and more aligned with what Kusuke's diction is. In other words, that Kusuke and Duromon will be thinking along the same line of thought, and they're coming to the same conclusion. I just like the conversation it's really slight, but I'm really looking forward to more interaction between Yoline and Ryudomon. What I like about this quote as well is that it really shows us a little insight into Yoline. They being the writers, could have left us, the audience, feeling like Yoline's the type of individual who doesn't like playful banter, is straight to the point, prefers to get the job done, and that's it. But we see right here that when there is leeway to be allowed, when there's opportunity and it doesn't have any negative impact, Yoline is able to have a little bit of a playful side, especially after she probably feels a little bit, not flustered, but kind of like, these code crackers wasted my time, let me go ahead and waste their time then. Again, long quote, but I think this quote says a lot, tells us a little bit of insight into the kind of relationship that Yoline has with Ryoriman, and gives us more insight into the kind of individual that Yoline is. Beyond that, I also am curious, this other adversary, is this the X Nation that they're referring to? I skipped over this line, but there's a part. Pardon me, no, I was getting ahead of myself. But it's not the X Nation, this is the present time. So I'm quite curious to who the adversary they're referring to, who could that be? After this, the following quote is in the flashback, it's in the past. Quite literally, the next line is, our story begins quite some time before Eiji Nagasomi was born. And so let's go ahead and go to the next quote. Actually, before I do that, let me make sure. One last thing, the fact that Yoline is thinking about Kosuke/Tartarus, just by looking at the interface, this tells us, the audience, that she does have a personal relationship with him, because if he was just a stranger, I would argue that she probably wouldn't be too concerned seeing the interface. We don't know if she knows his plans, what he's trying to do. If we were aware about that tidbit, if she was aware about that, then I would understand why she would be thinking about Kosuke. But she's not aware about that plan. The fact that she's thinking about him and looking at that interface, again, tells me that they have a personal relationship. And I think that's already been established within this part already. Actually, also within the trailer as well, when everyone's seen the Chapter 3 trailer, it's kind of hinted there as well. But let's go to the next quote. The completion of the Dirin district signaled the dawn of a new era for Tokyo, and before long, steel skeletons awaiting their new concrete skins loomed over the nearby Wangan district as well. Dump trucks and heavy machinery brought other materials to the district as a systemic renewal at the capital got underway. Yoling walked through her university's campus, trying to picture a world in which all the buildings around her had vanished. The entire campus was to be merged with the up and coming Denver district in just a few years' time. As difficult it was for her to envision it then, she couldn't help but feel a bit weird about the whole end of her. It would be such a dramatic transformation. This quote really has more to do with, I think, just me maybe looking at something that's not really there. But I can't help but wonder if maybe this is being foiled with what the professor's worried that the humans would do to the digital world. This is letting us know, this passage is letting us know that progress is being done in the real world. But despite this progress, the progress is causing a lot of change, a lot of differences. Is this a bad thing? Not necessarily, but it does cause for some awkward feelings. And one needs to keep in mind context as well. I'd argue that this is a positive thing that's occurring to this district. But if it was occurring, for example, discussing neighborhoods, or I guess a really easier way to mention this would be the discussion of gentrification. If this was just a neighborhood, a residential neighborhood going through such complex changes, will that be a good thing? Yes or no? Right? So this might be just me looking too much into it, but I can't help but feel like this might be a foil of some sort to some of the concerns or worries that the professor has in regards to the digital world and the real world, the changes and the manipulation that humans will do to make the digital world serve and work for them, despite the digital world being a natural, organic area, place. I didn't read this quote, but at the beginning of the story, it's established that research was indicating, actually it's after the flashback, that research indicated that life is not in space, but rather internally, that rather than the network just connecting to the network, that the network already existed, and it's where the digital world that was their plane. So again, the digital world was not created through the modifications of humanity, but it may have been a world that already existed naturally on its own. And that is true, then should humans be manipulating the digital world to be using it as a tool in the same way that in this neighborhood, since Dinrin district is becoming coming close to completion, it's going to change the Rangan district and change what used to be a familiar environment. Hopefully that makes sense, but that's why I wanted to review that quote, just because I think it's interesting that they included that. The air conditioning unit inside Ryusuji laboratories rattled away, circulating cool air in an eternal struggle to counteract the heat radiating off the many servers humming along on steel racks that partitioned the room. Good morning, Professor Ryusuji, Yoling said, despite the fact that it was already well into the evening. It was a cute custom in the lab, and she wasn't about to break it. Morning, Yoling, the assistant professor responded without lifting his eyes from the monitor before him. Got some mail for you, Yoling said, scattering a pile of envelopes on his desk. Ryusuji grunted, as was his style. Yoling wondered how long he'd been locked in a staring contest with his monitor. I've delivered the mail, okay? Acknowledge me with your words and eyes so we don't end up playing Did Yoling Deliver the Mail? I hate that game. There's the bug. Who wrote this awful code? You probably. No, couldn't have been. Could it? All you had to do was look at the commit history. All you had to do was look at the commit history to find his answer. And yet. So this quote, again, relates back to characterization. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure in Chapter 1 or Chapter 2, the professor tells Iji good morning, and Iji's a little bit confused about that because I believe it was afternoon. Or early or late afternoon. If I'm not misremembering that, I love this little detail right here, just connecting back to a previous detail. And it really adds to the professor's personality. Not just to the professor, but I think the fact that Yolene is saying good morning to him despite it being evening just really shows how personable the professor is. I'm still hopeful that the professor is not a villain character. We do discover some more information about his personal life, which we discuss at the end. But I am not unaware of the fact that, we did discuss this a little bit with the last part too, the fact that these prototype Digimon with interfaces on their heads, who has them? all these individuals that have connections to the professor. And now we get a confirmation that Kuski or Tartarus indeed also had a personal relationship with the professor. Last week we discussed a little bit. Iji got his Logomon from the professor. Yolene more than likely got her Yodomon through the professor. Did Tartarus find Doromon out in the wild, or did he also get his Digimon from the professor? It's looking more and more likely that, just like the other two, indeed, Koski got his through Doromon through the professor. With that being said, though, I do believe there's a deep, well, at least I hope there's a deeper meaning for this. I'm really hoping that the professor is not just a straight up villain and antagonist. I don't mind if he's doing some immoral, unethical actions in order to save his loved ones. Because again, at the beginning of the story, I really do believe he had a genuine concern for the Digimon and the digital world. So we'll find out as we continue forward. But I just like that little good morning tidbit. Just really shows how much of a community that they being the professor and his the people that he works with, how much of a community that they become close knit, implying that they're friendly with one another, they're really warm with one another. It's not a traditional professional relationship. It's professional with some friendliness sprinkled in it. Hopefully that makes sense. What I also like about this quote is how straight to the point Yolene is. She's speaking to, I would argue, someone who is her superior, right? Yet despite that, she makes sure to put her foot down and assert herself. Professor, please acknowledge that I brought the envelopes, the mail, so we don't play this game in the future. So that implies that this has occurred in the past. It's not just Yolene trying to be stubborn or rude. She's doing this because unfortunately the professor probably forgot that Yolene has brought the mail. He asks her, she goes, Professor, I brought it to you yesterday. Don't you recall? No, I do not. Why are you lying to me? And he's just forgetting because he's so engrossed in his work. Again, just really that small detail, that small comment really adds history to the relationship that's being presented here. And then lastly, just the way that it ends as here, he's totally ignoring her, engrossed in his work. There's the bug. Who wrote this awful code? You probably. He's like, no, it couldn't have been. And again, despite the fact he could have just looked at the information, why isn't he? Maybe because he's occupied, he's just working on this to take his mind off of something else. He's really thinking about another matter that's eating him up. We don't really know. Maybe this might be a small detail. It's just a minor detail that won't be touched upon again. We won't know until we continue with the story. But again, out of this, there's just so many elements that I really enjoyed from this passage. Okay, on to the next quote. I hear investment in our field is quietly exploding around the world, like exponentially. Excuse me, I can't pronounce words sometimes. Our advantage could vanish overnight. What are the politicians going to do if the world leapfrogs us? Should we get the jump on it and go overseas now? I bet you'd be in high demand. Wait just a minute, Yolene. Are you proposing we turn around and sell our nation's crown jewel for a song? Yelped a voice through one of the stool racks. There, on 3 chairs lined up between the racks themselves, lay a man. Excuse me, everyone, my cat. She moved the computer. Didn't see you there, Koski, Yoling said coolly to the upperclassman. Slept in the office again, he said matter-of-factly. Judging by the increasingly thick scruff on his face and the fact he was in the same clothes she saw him in the day before last, Yoling suspected again was code for hadn't been home in several days. Unkept or not, Koski Kiskata, excuse me for pronunciation, was part of the Ruzhenji Laboratories team. At least wash your face and brush your teeth. Did you even bring a change of clothes? Oh, about that, Kuski began when the door to the lab burst open, revealing a petite woman. Before we continue, one aspect I forgot to discuss from the previous quote. Let me quickly find it. Morning, Yuling, the professor says to to Yuling. The assistant professor responded without lifting his eyes. I just really like that detail, they being the writers, keeping in mind that the professor is not the head professor or professor emeritus, an individual who's retired but still working in academia, because this is the past. He's still working himself up, right? So right now he's an assistant professor. Smart detail, but again, really adds to the world building, makes the story feel more alive when he keeps those minor details in mind. And in addition to those minor details, the fact that we find out that Yoling is an underclassman while Koski is an upperclassman, again, that adds minor detail, but adds a little bit more to the characterization of these individuals. Despite the fact that Yoling worked has worked with Kosuke, they weren't from the same level, or rather, they weren't from the same year. They only met through this common this common project that they're doing together through the professor. We'll see if there's any merit or any uh, significance or importance to that, but I'm sure that we'll be able to continue with the story. Um, so what we like about this as well is that it shows us that Yoling is very conventional. She's very, what's the word? Pragmatic. She's aware that unfortunately all this red tape is preventing the professor from progressing the way that he wants to. But despite this progress, they could still get the head in front of everyone if they wanted to. There's other option that's available to them besides just research, but financial gain as well. Is that a negative or a positive thing about Yolene's characterization? I would argue that it's just neutral. She's a young individual. She's just a college student at this point, probably a junior, if not a sophomore. And she's just, or maybe they're in graduate school, so it's her first year in grad school. She's just keeping her future prospects in mind. I think that shows more about her as a critical thinker rather than anything positive, rather than anything negative or positive. I would argue that being a critical thinker would be a neutral aspect. I would hope that most of us are critical thinkers. So that's what I'll count that as a neutral aspect. But despite if that's neutral or not, we obviously have Kosuke who does not agree with that approach. Are you really saying that we should sell our data or research for a song or for a lot of money? And this individual, not only is he invested in the research, he's, I would argue, very invested. Well, what evidence is there for that? The fact that he's unkept and that probably hasn't showered as guessed by Yoling for multiple days, not just one day. Why hasn't he showered? Not because he's a bum or because he's lazy, but like the professor, I would argue that they seem to have that same mindset of really putting their projects or their work at the forefront and focusing on that. When they have the mindset on something, everything else probably becomes a little bit blurry and become a little bit tunnel vision or narrow-minded once they set their goals on once they set their eyes and the perspective on a specific objective. Because we really saw with the professor, when he has someone in front of him giving him mail, he's too engrossed with his work. It's looking like that trait is also present with Kosuke. So moving on. So feeding time, you feral beasts. In a flurry of activity, she shoved aside the items at the meeting table to make room for a stack of takeaway beef bows. Oh yes, I'm starving. Here's your change of clothes, Kosuke, she said, tossing him a paper bag. Saya, did you go all the way to Kosuke's house to get him a change of clothes? Yep. Oh, and don't worry, I brought you some food too. Pork bow, right? Saya beamed, handing Yoling a takeaway bow. Thanks. Here's some cash. Put that away. It's Dad's. I mean, the professor's treat. It came with the pork miso soup too. Whoa, really? Wow, you don't see that every day, Yoling said with no small amount of surprise as she glanced over at Professor Ruzenji. So that's the end of this part. So right off the bat, let me just quickly say, I am aware about the trailer. I'm going to do my best. I know I already mentioned it a little bit, but I'm going to do my best to not discuss the trailer whatsoever. I don't know about the rest of you, but I personally have been reading Seekers without really looking up external information. I've just been reading the parts of the chapters. When the story first started, I did look at the character bios only when I felt like I needed to because there was some new information. But besides for that, I did my best just to focus on Seekers. I do watch the trailers, but I just watched them a couple times. And again, for me, I'm focusing more on the text. I do feel like this new trailer for Chapter 3 does reveal, it does allow for the deduction of many plot points. So that's why I don't really want to focus on that so much. I'd rather focus on the quote itself. And what I love about this quote is that we're finally getting some more information about the professor. We're getting some personal information about him. I would argue that so far we've gotten a lot of professional background about him, and now I'm really looking forward to getting to know more about the professor as an individual. He has a kid. He has a daughter. I think that's really awesome. That's really cool. So again, I think this is going to lend credence to the fact that even if the professor is doing some scrupulous activity, there's a good reason for it. There's a positive reason for it. We're going to find out as we continue with the story for what cause would the professor start working with code crackers. We see right here, the story mentions specifically that there's 3 students that the professor's working with, Yoline, Kosuke, and the third one has not been announced. Maybe I'm just being slow and I don't realize who it is yet, but I'm quite curious who that third individual is. Let me quickly go ahead and find that. Languages, dude. Tomori Shunji quickly emerged as one of the prominent figures in the race to explore and study this new digital frontier, and he tapped 3 of his most vibrant young scholars to assist him in his laboratory. Maybe it's his daughter, but I'll be a little bit nepotistic, so I'm hoping it's not his daughter. It can't be Leon, because as the story pointed out in the past, this is before Eiji Nagasumi was born. So either the third person is his daughter, or they're going to be revealed. Maybe it's Marvin. We'll find out hopefully with the next part. But this for me does so much for the professor's characterization. Any questionable acts or activities that he's been doing up to this point, I think could be not excused, but now we be the audience, we have a possible connection as to why the professor might be acting the way that he is. So who is the villain of Digimon Seekers? I think we're going to go ahead and find out as we continue with this objective that Kusuke or Tartarus has a source code. Can this source code maybe be helpful in saving Leon from coming out of his DMIA? What about Saya? She hasn't been present in the present timeline. What about this Black Agumon that was introduced at the beginning of the story? Could she maybe have been partners with that Black Agumon? We'll go ahead and find out as we continue with the story, but I'm not gonna lie, I'm quite intrigued. As always, Digimon Seekers, when I start feeling like, oh, is this story slowing down a little bit? It gets my attention again and makes me feel really excited for the future parts of the story as well. So yeah, that's everything that I have for this part. Really happy that we're getting some more information about not just Yolene, but about Tartarus, Kusuke, and about the professor now. Yeah, so what's my question for this week? What do you think happened to Saya? Do you think that maybe she had the same fate as Leon's possibly having right now? So in other words, are they both DMIA? Or is there any connection between Saya and Black Agumon? And then lastly, what do you think about Kusuke / Tartarus? I guess that's 2 questions. To reiterate, my questions are, what do you think happened to Saya? And what's your opinion about Kusuke? I do believe she's DMIA, and so far, I'm really enjoying Tartarus. I probably sound like a broken record because whenever these new characters get introduced, like Marvin the Songbird, Satsuki, even Hatsumi the Receptionist, and now Yolene, I'm really appreciating all these characters. Yolene, I'm kind of being quiet on for right now because this is the first part that we're getting more about her. But I'm really positive with her as well. I'm sure when the next part next week comes out, I'm going to be saying I really enjoyed Yolene's characterization. I am loving all the characters, and Yolene won't be any different. So far, even from this brief introduction, I love the way that she's assertive, and the way that she's the way that she's assertive and she asserts herself in situations. No wonder she became the chief of Digipolice. It makes so much sense. I'm wondering now if we're going to get any background information about Hatsumi. Or Setsuki, excuse me. Though honestly, it wouldn't surprise me if we did. Thank you so much for joining me. I really do appreciate it. I hope you have a prodigious day. And also, thanks for your patience with my hair. Whenever I start these videos, my hair is a little bit damp, so it starts drying up. So yeah, again, thank you so much and take care.